So welcome everyone. Thank you for logging on and attending this evening's virtual program. My name is Matt Schumann. I am on the programming team here at Cary Library. Before we begin, just a few things to note. Please let me know in the chat if there are any technical issues that I can try to resolve. And if you have any comments or questions, feel free to submit them via the Q&A or just raise your hand and I can elevate you to be able to talk. With us this evening is violinist Ilana Zaks. Ilana performed with the Boston Civic Symphony, Rhode Island Philharmonic Orchestra, New England Philharmonic, among many other orchestras. At age 11, she had her debut with the Boston Civic Symphony under the conductorship of Maestro Max Hobart. She has won numerous awards at various competitions, and she is interested in creating theatrical, multidisciplinary collaborations, breaking the stereotypes of modern musical experiences through the inclusion of contemporary works by women. Now, please welcome Ilana.
Thank you, Matt. Good evening, everybody. It's so great to be here with the Cary Memorial Library. I'm Ilana, and I'm streaming to you from my home in Needham. You'll be hearing a classical music program played on the violin. And then at the end of the program, there will be a question and answer for anybody who has any questions they'd like to ask myself or about the music or about myself. So the first piece on the program is a work by Telemann. Telemann was a Baroque composer. He lived to write many, many important pieces. He was actually one of the most important Baroque composers of his time. He composed many fantasies for solo instruments, including 12 for flute, 12 for harpsichord, and 12 for violin. It's kind of funny because the violin ones are rarely performed. He was just so overshadowed by Bach that Telemann is a little bit overlooked, I think. But his 12 fantasies are really, really special and very charming. And you'll hear one of them today. He composed these in 1735. They were actually titled 12 Fantasies for Violin Without Bass, because oftentimes the violin would play with the basso continuo bass line. And Telemann specified that this is indeed just violin, nothing underneath. You'll be hearing the 9th fantasy. It's written in B minor and has 3 movements. The first movement is called Siciliana, the second movement is a vivace, and the third movement is an allegro. The first movement is extremely slow. It's very beautiful. But another thing about it is that it's a slow dance. It was a dance it's an ancient dance form, and it was a slow dance that was performed, but also danced and enjoyed in the time that Telemann lived. The interesting thing is that that's the only dance movement in this fantasy. The other 2 movements are simply tempo markings. The other interesting thing about Telemann is, in general, the Baroque period had no metronome markings because a metronome did not exist. And in terms of dynamics, the music is very, very sparse. You basically only see violin notes. You don't really see dynamics. You don't really see markings about indications of how it should be played, what kind of emotion. The marking at the beginning, Siciliana, vivace, these are the only markings that indicate any type of expression that the composer has intended for this piece. And the piano and the fortes are the only dynamics. There's nothing in between. And each dynamic signifies a moment of tension or a moment of release. And in this particular piece, all the bass lines are a combination of the 2. And the phrases are very symmetrical, which is a very typical characteristic of this style of music, especially for violin. But one of the things I love about this particular fantasy is how there's a juxtaposition between the positive parts in D major and the B minor parts, which is a very sad key and comprises most of the whole fantasy. So this is Telemann's Fantasy number 9 in B minor. So you just heard Telemann's Ninth Fantasy for solo violin. The next piece on the program is a transcription by Nathan Milstein, and this is a piece that was originally written for piano. It's called the Mephisto Waltz No. 1. It was actually composed for piano originally by Franz Liszt, who's a really great composer and was kind of the Paganini of the piano. He was extremely virtuosic. Many people found Liszt to be the greatest pianist who ever lived in the 1900s, or rather 1800s, 19th century. This is a piece that was transcribed by Nathan Milstein, who is a great 20th century violinist, and he was a virtuosic violinist who was often overshadowed by Jascha Heifetz. Many people attributed Milstein to be kind of the shadow of Jascha Heifetz, but he wasn't as marketable, and Jascha Heifetz was much more popular. However, Milstein taught his students for his whole life, and most of his students remember of him being as a trickster and somebody who was always experimenting and trying to find ways of making different kind of music and always challenging the capabilities of the violin. This is a waltz that I found actually a transcription of, and it's a really fabulous work, I think. And if any of you are pianists, please feel free to comment. And if you've heard the piece, this particular transcription also, please feel free to comment. This is Liszt's Mephisto Waltz No. 1 for solo violin, transcribed by Nathan Milstein. Oh, thank you, Sandra. Sandra? Appreciate it. Oh, we have a question.
Yeah, do you
Was
want
it
me to?
often at that
Oh.
time that composers and musicians would transcribe another's work? So, in particular, in 1900s, 19th century, it was a very common practice to do that. There's some composers who actually have transcriptions of others' work. For example, Schnittke did a lot of transcriptions of Paganini for piano. And it goes both ways. There's some people who did transcriptions of, for example, film scores, like Cortellano, and he made a transcription for solo violin, and made the Caprice set. So it is definitely a common practice. I don't really know why they did that, but I think as a performer, it's really great to be able to play other music that different types of people and audiences would recognize from playing it themselves. And I actually chose this piece because I heard it many, many years ago on the piano, and I really, really enjoyed it. And then I found a transcription of this work online, and I listened to it. I actually heard Milstein play it Really liked the recording and decided to learn it and perform it today. Thank you for the question, Sandra. So if anybody has any questions about any of the music, please feel free to write it in the chat at any time. I'm happy to answer between pieces. So the next piece on the program is a work by Piazzolla. This is a tango etude that he wrote. It was originally written for flute. He wrote 6, and all 6 were written for flute originally. Then he made a transcription for solo violin. I guess a lot of violinists pestered him about it. And so he wrote 6 for violin. I'll be playing number 3, and I'll be playing also number 5 for you all today. Piazzolla has a very similar kind of rhythmic pattern that he uses in all of his etudes. It's always the first beat, and it's always the last beat. And then sometimes it's the second beat, and it's the off beat that gets accented, which creates a very distinct rhythm. And it's interesting because sometimes you can say it verbally and it sounds similar and almost doesn't matter what notes you play because the rhythm is the most important part. And that's really what defines Piazzolla's music, is the rhythm and the character in the rhythm. And of course, because these are all tangos, that is particularly important. So I'll be playing first the tango etude number 3, and then you'll hear tango etude number 5. So that was the third and fifth etudes by Oscar Piazzolla. The final piece on tonight's program is a work by Prokofiev, Sergei Prokofiev. Sergei Prokofiev was a composer born in Russia. He lived in the 1900s, and he was one of the most influential and important composers of his time. He a violin near the end of his life in 1947, and it was actually commissioned by the Soviet Union as a student piece for 2 players. It was actually not performed until Prokofiev died, and it's really sad. It's a really great piece. It has 3 movements. The first movement is composed in sonata form. It's really, really joyful, very beautiful, and it's one of my favorite movements. Variation, about 5 variations, and it's all written in B flat major, which is a very big contrast to the main key of the piece, D major. And the last movement is a very joyful mazurka. It's a very fun piece. The mazurka is in 3. It's very heavy, but Prokofiev does something different. Instead of just using 3s, he has 5 tuplets, which kind of confuses the rhythm, which is something that Prokofiev enjoys doing. But it really adds to the dance and the regularity of the dance, which I think is very, very effective. Thank you all so much for coming to this concert tonight. Please feel free to post your questions in the chat. I will also be answering questions after this Prokofiev work. Thank you all so much for coming. And thank you to Matt Schumann and the Carey Memorial Library for hosting me today. It's really great to be with you all. Oh, hi, Matt. Thank you, Deepti. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.